Hello and welcome to Seattle City Makers. I'm your host, Jon Scholes. Welcome everybody to our latest episode. I'm joined by Jon Buerge, the president of Urban Villages, a Denver-based developer that has transformed a number of historic buildings and developed other properties in downtown Denver, in particular in the Lodo area of Denver. They've been a part of the transformation of that neighborhood over a number of years. And several years ago, they acquired 3/4 of a block in downtown Seattle in the Pioneer Square neighborhood, the site of the former FX McCrory restaurant. And they've assembled the properties there and have been reimagining them and developing them into a mixed-use village over these last several years. Jon lives in Boulder and is a graduate of the University of Colorado, where he got his undergrad and an MBA and his law degree. He was student body president there, and he is thrilled with all the new energy Coach Prime has brought to town. He's a 40 Under 40 Denver Business Journal Award recipient. He's active with the Urban Land Institute in Denver, as well as our counterpart, the Downtown Denver Partnership, a terrific organization that's been around for a number of decades in Denver and been really a leader in the transformation of their terrific downtown. Jon and I discussed the RailSpur project, as it is known, their property in Pioneer Square, and the progress there in their efforts to reimagine it into a what will be a just tremendous mixed-use project and addition to the incredible Pioneer Square neighborhood. We discussed their approach to development, Jon's take on the future of work, some of the new tenants that have already opened their doors in RailSpur, and a little bit of a taste of what's to come. And we get to some of the standard questions on the podcast, Jon's first job, and his perfect Saturday in the city of Seattle. Hope you enjoy my conversation with Jon Buerge, president of Urban Villages. Well, thanks for making time for this. Welcome to town. You just got in, right?
Yeah, I did.
You brought some of the crisp Colorado clear blue skies to Seattle.
Beautiful day. Half the time I'm here, it's beautiful.
It wasn't yesterday.
Well,
or this weekend, I guess. But good to have you here. And I thought we could talk a little bit about, obviously, your project here and the investments you're making. And for folks that might not be aware of RailSpur and maybe starting with kind of how it came to be and how you all came to acquire the old FX McCrory site, plus other portions of that full block, and how the vision originated. And then we'll get into kind of the status and sort of where you're at today. But where did that all begin for Urban Villages?
Yeah, well, I might start by talking a little bit about our company. Mm-hmm. We really, true to our name, Urban Villages, we believe that the strongest, most resilient, most sustainable communities are communities that feel and function like a village. And if you think about what a village really is, it's a true mix of uses. When you think of like an old world village, you had people living there, working there, farming there, shopping, all within the confines of a village. And a lot of our downtowns are void of any kind of a sense of community. You know, most of the urban cores in America are made up of office districts, residential districts, everything's separated. And we believe that the best neighborhoods are mingled because they're vibrant. They can create that energy throughout the day. Mm-hmm. They don't just disappear at 5 o'clock when everybody leaves the office. And so we've really built our business on this idea that, you know, trying to find great neighborhoods that have that true sense of a village in urban cores, and trying to do our part to add to that village environment. We are long-term investors, and so we have the opportunity to really look at what are the fundamental long-term sustainable things happening in communities, and then investing in them. And we've done that in markets across the United States. Seattle, when we first started looking at Seattle, Pioneer Square was kind of the neighborhood that immediately caught our attention. And part of it is because we love the historic charm.
Was that 2018, 17, that thereabouts?
Yeah, it was about 6 or 7 years ago. So I think the first trip that I took here was in 2015, 2016. Mm-hmm. And, we started, building from there. And as you know, at that time, Pioneer Square has been in a transition for 30 years. But there's some fundamental changes that were starting to happen, and were on the slate, back when we first started looking. And the first and foremost was the double-decker viaduct that was cutting that neighborhood off from the waterfront. And we looked at that and saw this blight, like so many people in Seattle recognized. And the fact that the tunnel was funded and underway when we first started looking around for properties, we knew that was going to change, and we knew that was going to have a fundamental impact on Pioneer Square. We also love the fact that Pioneer Square, while having the right kind of scale and the right kind of character of the original downtown of Seattle, it's surrounded by really incredible drivers. You have the International District, you have the mass transit, the Stadium District, obviously, with all the events and the activation that happens there, the CBD just to the north. And then the waterfront and everything that the city was going to be doing to reinvest and reclaim, that incredible natural amenity for that neighborhood and for the whole.
I've always thought that neighborhood was the one that stood the most to gain
absolutely
from the waterfront project. I mean, partly just because of the grade, being so consistent, but
so it has all the fundamental drivers of a great neighborhood, and COVID obviously slowed some things down. But we believe, again, by taking that long view, that if you go forward 10 years, I believe that Pioneer Square is going to be one of those vibrant neighborhoods in Seattle. There's a lot of great development that's happening, including our project RailSpur. And we look at it as a total neighborhood. And so we've made already significant investment with 3 buildings, and our plan is to continue to invest in Pioneer Square. And we think that there's sort of a rising tide effect, that as we start to invest and improve buildings and improve the retail scene and improve what's happening, that creates more value in that neighborhood. And we want to be a part of that by investing in additional buildings. The other thing I would say is that Pioneer Square is kind of unreal when you think about how much of the historic fabric is intact. I'm from Colorado, and we've invested heavily in a similar model in Denver's historic downtown, lower downtown. And Lodo is got some great historic fabric, but it's got a lot of new buildings. And as you know, spending time there are times you see these beautiful buildings and you get some of that historic perspective, but there are new buildings all around them. And part of that is because of urban renewal in the 70s and 80s. A lot of the historic
I was going to say some new being like 70s and 80s construction right next to historic building. And then some maybe a little newer than that. But
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so the fact that that Pioneer Square, that the entire district is on the registry, and the fact that they were able to preserve that entire area. I mean,
maybe we don't fully appreciate that here, to your point, of just the rare consistency. And how unique that is.
There are places in Pioneer Square. I mean, there's the new Weyerhaeuser building. There's some great new modern inserts. But for the most part, the majority of that neighborhood is all late 1800s, early 1900s. And so there's a charm that's hard to fake. And there's a lot of problems in Pioneer Square, as we all know. But there's these long-term fundamental core drivers of great communities that are intact. And we're really excited to be a part of that, and hopefully be a part of turning that neighborhood into a positive direction.
So those are all the great reasons you all chose to invest and develop there. And for those that aren't familiar with the 3/4 block project, what's the sort of thumbnail on the program? And did it shift at all in from 2016-17 to today, as far as what you're trying to bring to life within the buildings?
Yeah, absolutely. So RailSpur consists of 3 buildings, and it's the majority of a city block that's bordered by Occidental, King, First. So that whole area and you mentioned FX McCrory's at 419 Occidental, that's one of the signature buildings that we acquired. When we first started to acquire that block, the thing that really stuck out to us was the very unique alley situation. Most of the neighborhood in Pioneer Square has a north-south alley that kind of splits the blocks in half. This is the only city block in Pioneer Square that has 2 alleys crisscrossing. And so what that allowed us to do is to create this really unique alley space. And we've kind of always used the term like an Italian piazza. There's something that's really great about the tighter experience in an alley compared to broad streets that we have in Seattle. And so being able to look at that public area and try to figure out ways that we could program that and turn it into a really vibrant retail food and beverage experience, that's really what drove us to the block. great historic buildings, all built in the early 1900s, and the way that they were built, and their place in Seattle's history. You mentioned FX McCrory's. I was there for 40 years, and a lot of people have very real memories of going there and meeting friends or going to a sports game, and so there's already been this this experience that's burnt into people's memories.
Yeah, there's stories there, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's the best way to build place, is to lean on what was there before and build upon it. When we first started looking at these buildings, one of the very first things that we realized is that we are in a heavy seismic zone. In Denver, we don't really have that risk. And so when we're looking at historic buildings, you don't have to deal with the structural component quite as much. And so when we first started looking at these buildings and assessing the structural conditions, we realized that they were in really tough shape, like a lot of Pioneer Square. And knowing that there is a very real possibility of a seismic event, and these unreinforced masonry buildings are going to be compromised in that kind of situation, we really started to look at, well, how do we preserve these buildings?
Was that the case for the entire 3/4 blocks for all the structures?
Yeah, they're all. So we've delivered 2 of them. We're working on the 3rd one right now, and they will all be fully seismically upgraded. We're also going through a pretty significant renovation of each of the buildings. So the first building, 419 Occidental, where FX McCrory's is located, has brace frames and reconnected floor diaphragms. So that building is as structurally sound as a brand new building today, according to seismic code. It's also a LEED Platinum building. And so one of the things that's interesting about these old historic buildings, single pane glass, a lot of times, a lot of deferred maintenance, sometimes archaic mechanical systems. So from an energy standpoint, they don't perform very well. But we like to talk about how the greenest building is when you don't have to build. So if you can take an existing building and renovate it and future-proof it, do things like we've done with the seismic upgrades.
And the ones you don't have to tear down either, right?
Yeah, exactly. You think about all the materials that go into building a building. If you can take these existing buildings and modernize them, it's a much better thing for the resources of the planet. And 419 Occidental, the old FX building, that building is set up now for the next 200 years.
And there you've got a mix of office, some food and beverage opportunities, some retail currently operating.
Yep.
Is that the full program?
Yeah, you asked about if things have changed and since COVID, and they certainly had. We looked at that as somewhat traditional as an office building. Like I said, it's a LEED Platinum building, and we were looking to deliver, the historic charm of an old 1800s, 1900s building, but with all the modern amenities of a Class A new build. And we delivered on that right into, work from home and what's going on with office. And so we've changed course, and now we're going forward with a new way of thinking about office, where we are building the spaces out. And we're looking at leasing them out in flexible, ultra flexible, month-to-month type leases in small to medium-sized sections. And so we're changing course. It's still going to be office for the most part, but trying to really err towards what we think the future of office is, where companies are going to look for a lot more flexibility. They want to be able to have great spaces that are high quality, but they want to be able to sign up for a month or 6 months or a year, not traditionally 10-year leases. And so we've changed course. The other thing that we've done, we have this beautiful penthouse that we built on to the top of the building. And we originally thought of that as kind of the premium office space in the building.
With some great outdoor spaces, right?
Yeah, you've seen it. It's a beautiful space. When COVID hit, we started to play with pop-up events. And so we partnered with a group called Forest for the Trees. And they did a number of different art festivals up there where we had DJs. We've had some live bands up there. We've actually even utilized it for some events, for some company events. And the space functions really, really well as an event space. And so we're changing course and really looking at that as permanently an event space where we could have weddings and business retreats and concerts and art festivals. And that's part of also creating an environment that businesses want to be in. When you think about commodity office, it's going to be really hard for a lot of the kind of downtown single purpose buildings to come back because office users don't necessarily want that kind of sterile environment.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're creating at RailSpur, we've got multifamily, we have a multitude of restaurants, we have services, we have retail, we have event space, we have a hotel, and all connected with this alley system that's going to be programmed constantly. And that's the kind of environment that a lot of people want to come to work in every day. And
the village.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Oh, I didn't know that about the top floor and the pivot to an event space. That's great to know, and it is a great space. We did a board meeting up there that you spoke at, but then we did the event downstairs, which was also terrific in December of 21 or whenever that was. But great to know how you're utilizing the top floor and then the pivot to the sort of co-working model. Is that how you're describing it or thinking about it, and how you're leasing out in a more flexible terms the rest of the office?
Yeah, we've avoided the phrase co-working, partly because we're trying to differentiate the product. But when I look at co-working, I think of WeWork, and I think of other businesses where a lot of their businesses hot desks, where you can, you pay a fee and you've got tables like the one we're sitting at where you can sit and utilize the space and rent out conference rooms. The way we're designing this is more similar, more akin to what Hoxton Hotel Group has been doing with co-working. And that is more about creating these pods. And so the way that we're designing our office is that there are 300, 400 square foot office pods, and you can rent those out as a company as a single pod, or you can cluster them and you could put 4 or 5 of them all together. So if you're a business that you start off and you say, I've got 5 employees and I want a great office environment, a great space, but I don't know if we're going to close our funding. I don't know if we're going to double our employees. And so being able to come in, rent a pod, occupy that space, and then all of a sudden you close some financing and you double the size of your staffing. Within a week, all of a sudden you can grow into a bigger space. And you can cluster them in such a way that you've got 3 or 4 or 5 pods with common area in between it. So you can really function as an office space. What I've heard time and time again from prospective office tenants is that flexibility, both being able to shrink and grow depending on how business is going. And so if we can deliver that in a professional setting that's vibrant and full of life and flexibility, and being able to have different types of conference rooms that you can utilize but not have to be exclusively renting, that's what tenants are looking for. And we think part of that solution is through creative leasing structures and through creative design to provide that flexibility. And so that's what we're really leaning in on. We're building 2 floors, so it's a total of 5 floors in the building. We're going to build 2 of them out initially. And if we get the right kind of momentum, we'll go forward and build the entire building out in the same way.
So you're sharing amenities and common spaces with other tenants?
Yeah, so the floors can occupy up to 17 pods. And so as that gets filled out, the kitchen area is all shared. The bathrooms are all shared. And then we have a series of different types of conference rooms. We have a very large room that might be for big presentations. And we have a whole series of different size conference rooms. And so as a tenant in one of these spaces, you've got the availability. If you have a big fundraising event and you have 40 people coming in, you've got a really functional, large size conference space to be able to utilize. If you have just a conference call and you need a smaller conference room, that's available as well. So the idea is that you're not paying for a giant conference room that you use twice a month. You're be able to share it with the other tenants in the space.
While we're on the topic of offices, where do you see all this shaking out as far as the future of work and number of days in the office versus not? Where do you think this lands a year or 2 from now?
Well, I'm not going to pretend like I know more than anybody else. And I've heard a whole variety of different ideas about how offices evolved. From my perspective, we still need great office working environments. Every company that I speak with, with very few tech-driven businesses that are completely avoiding it, are all talking about the need to be able to have great dynamic office space. But remote working is here to stay. And so most businesses are embracing it. And I think what we're doing in our company is we're trying to create a schedule in which Mondays and Fridays have a lot of flexibility. And so if you want to work from the mountains or you want to work from home or wherever you are, we've created that flexibility into the way that our meeting structures are set up. And we try to concentrate everybody to be in the office Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays. And so you end up creating this kind of bell curve. And you see that in a lot of cities. I'm sure that Monday and Friday outside of your building here is probably a lot different from a foot traffic than Wednesdays.
Yeah, a little quieter.
Yeah. But the interesting thing from the real estate standpoint is that you still need the space. We have a number of office tenants all over the country, and the same thing comes out of every conversation. We can't really shrink too much because if we want to get everybody in the office at the same time, we're going to balloon on that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or whatever days they pick. And so this idea of shrinking the office, people need a lot more flexibility in how the space is used, but they still need office space. And I think that's something that is going to forever be the case. We are social beings. We want to spend time together and we want to collaborate. And it's different, no matter how good technology is, it's different when you're looking at a screen. And so I think that people will continue to come together, but because we have more control, we have more say, and we have an ability to kind of dictate where we want to be, there's a higher priority on place. All of a sudden now, office tenants want to be in places that their employees want to hang out.
Higher expectations on
Totally.
design. And what's the story in Denver on return to office? Is it your sense? Is it similar to Seattle? 55% relative to same time in 2019. Is that about where you all are at?
Yeah, it is. I think Denver's got a little bit more momentum at returning to the office, but it's the same thing on Mondays and Fridays. It's pretty quiet, and it's affecting all sorts of areas of the city differently, just like it is in Seattle. There are areas in Denver that have not even come close to returning to where they were pre-pandemic, but there are other neighborhoods that are pretty much at pre-pandemic foot traffic. My office is in lower downtown Denver. And while it's not quite the same as it was before the pandemic, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays, it sure feels like it. And so you're starting to see that, Lodo, like Pioneer Square in Seattle, is a great neighborhood. There's a lot of food and beverage. There's a lot of things going on. There's mix of uses. There's residential. And so it has a different kind of vibrancy. When you go into the CBD, the Central Business District in Denver, it is different, and it doesn't have that same kind of revitalization. And I sense that it's similar in Seattle, that there's pockets that have thrived and come back and pockets that have not.
Gets back to that village concept, right? Of those mix of uses that give you that resiliency and diversity. And mixed use has been talked about for quite some time, right? And it feels like you all, in the investments you've made and projects you've done both here and Denver and other places, you take sort of a finer grain to it, and the scale and the mix is very thoughtful. You could call an office building with a deli in the ground floor mixed use, right? And so we sort of use that term loosely, I think, in development and talking about downtowns and urbanism. But you all feel very intentional about taking it to like a finer grain and a finer scale. Even how you're thinking of the office space in RailSpur now, of event space on top, and now these 2 floors may be traditional office, and the other 2 we're going to experiment and sort of pilot this pod approach.
Yeah, I think you absolutely nailed it. For us, mixed use technically is a building that has more than one use in it, right? But we try to look at it really about how do you create a great place, and that is, you have to have creativity. You have to react to the environment in which you're working in. So it's not just about being mixed use because we want to have an office building that has some retail on the ground floor. It's really about creating an environment in which you've got that activation constantly throughout the day. And you think about, as we start to wrap up RailSpur and stabilize that project, we're going to have 120 hotel rooms. We've got 27 residential units. We've got 150,000 square feet of office. And we have every single ground floor of every building is a combination of dynamic food and beverage, retail, event space. And it's about that environment that we're creating. It's also, we look at it as mix of uses in a district, not just in a building. And I think that gives us the ability to be able to kind of think about it in a little bit more of a holistic way. If you have a mixed use building, but you're on an island, you don't control anything else around you, you're trying to create that environment within four walls. And that's very difficult. But when you can start to look at it with properties around you and partnerships with the community, then you're creating a really kind of sustainable mix of uses, not just sort of a pop of saying, I've got a building that's got different revenue streams.
And you all did that certainly with the Forest for the Trees event, which was super cool to invite all of that art and thousands of people in through the doors for free, right? I think that was all. It seems in your DNA to reach out and engage the community, neighborhood, other folks around you. Make for a better neighborhood and a better development too.
Well, we often start with the question like, well, what would we be drawn to? And you went to that event, like it was cool.
Super cool.
The environment was interesting.
And the stuff you all did with around All-Star Week and the alleys and the art, and it's pretty great.
Yeah, so it's about creating spaces that feel good and events that are going to attract people. And that's kind of how we start is what would we be attracted to? Where would we want to rent office? Where would we want to rent an apartment? Where would we want to stay at a hotel? And that kind of drives us to create places that are not commodities. The hotel that will be opening next summer, like that is, it's unbranded. It's not a Hyatt or a Hilton or, some big national flag. It's really very food and beverage.
Will you all operate that, or you have an operating partner?
We have an operating partner called Aperium. And one of the reasons that we selected Aperium is they're very much about food and beverage forward. They create hotels that locals hang out at. How many hotels are there in the city that if we were all to get together and have a beer, you probably wouldn't go to like the Hilton bar, right? You're going to go to, something that's kind of unique where the local community hangs out. And our goal is that that the hotel that's going to be in RailSpur is really meant to be a place that the locals hang out. And then that makes it cool for the hotel guests because you're not just sitting there with a bunch of out-of-towners that are just going down to the lobby to grab a drink. You're actually hanging out in a vibrant space that people want to spend time in. And
with people that can tell you about the city you're visiting, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And I know the original plans called for a rooftop restaurant and bar. Is that still the case?
Yeah, and it will be the first in Pioneer Square, which is pretty exciting. We thought at first that there was going to be some pushback from the community because there's a lot of residential around us. And we thought, well, if we put a food and beverage location on a roof with a big wraparound deck, where we get a lot of pushback. And what we were shocked by is we went and talked to a lot of the HOAs and residential buildings around us, and they were like emphatically excited.
They want to be up there drinking.
Yeah, they're like, well, this is going to be where we're going to go to hang out. So absolutely. So yeah, we're really excited. It's got almost as much square footage on the exterior as it does on the interior. So it's got this really beautiful wraparound deck. With some fire pits and some really great spaces where you can see the city skyline of Puget Sound. It's I think it's going to be a beautiful space.
And the timeline on that is?
We're targeting right now to open in the late summer, early fall of next year.
That's great.
So we're getting pretty close.
Yeah. We don't have enough roof decks and rooftop restaurants and bars in Seattle. And the ones we have are great and are oversubscribed and popular. And so I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be great. So back down to the ground floor, you've been successful in getting in some different types of tenants.
Yes.
Who can you share who's there today? Folks don't know. And if there's any news you want to break on deals that are close or that are signed but not announced, you can do that too here on Seattle City Makers.
All right, great. Well, we have a really great Mexican fast casual restaurant called Taco Listo that's been open for about 6 months now. Really great, kind of high culinary, but very quick and approachable Mexican cuisine. And that is a really unique space because it has the restaurant, then it also has this alley facing bar that really opens up into that public space. So unique experience. We also have a concept called Herd, which is a really cool coffee and bike shop concept. And that has both a bike club membership where you can actually go and drop your bike off on your way to work and have a shower and get your work clothes on. Grab a cup of coffee on your way to the office, and then on the way back, grab a glass of wine before riding home. So that's a really neat retail concept. And we've got 2 deals that we're eminently going to be announcing, signed deals that we're really, really excited about. One is a local restaurant group that's done some extraordinary restaurants in town. We're in the final phases of negotiating that deal, which is actually going to have a microbrewery concept along with fine dining. So really a great use for that specific area that will not only
those are different things, but that sounds like a cool mix.
And a big space that can be kind of broken up into different sections. We're also going to have a bakery and a breakfast concept, and a really extraordinary high-end cocktail bar that will be in the alley as well. So I can't yet officially announce the names, but I'm pretty sure you know who they are. And if I were to tell you the names, you know exactly who they were and be really excited. I think they're extraordinary partnerships that are going to really validate what we're doing, because we're being able to bring in the best of the best. And we believe that if you can get the ground floor right, that goes a long way to getting everything else right. And so really been taking our time and being very patient to get the right groups.
That sounds like an exciting mix. It's a great mix already, and one you're going to make stronger. How do you all sort of referee the decisions around cool versus cost? I mean, you've done something super cool there in an environment where there's still a lot of uncertainty over return to office and the future of downtowns and urban places, in a neighborhood and buildings and structures that have their own additional complexity with unreinforced masonry that you've had to deal with. So how do you sit around the table with your partners and team and sort of referee cool versus cost? Because everybody would like to do the cool thing, but not everybody does it.
Well, that's a great question.
Or maybe everybody doesn't know what cool is. Is that is that what?
I think the benefit we have is we have great alignment with our investors in the fact that we look at things over the long term. And I think a lot of people, a lot of companies, a lot of investors in real estate are by the nature short-term investors. It's very rare for an investor to look at a real estate deal on anything much longer than a 5-year time horizon. And so if the market doesn't show that, there's been 10 other buildings that have done this, and I know I just have to hit this certain return and then I can sell the building and be out in 4 or 5 years, it's very hard to do something that's kind of off script. But because of the fact that we're able to look at these investments over the long run, we've been able to outpace the market from our returns. So it's not to say that we compromise our return on investment. We just have a different time horizon. We're able to think about this from a 10, 20, 30 multi-generational return standpoint. And when you look at it that way, it's really important to focus on, like I said before, the fundamentals. The fact that we're a block and a half from the largest mass transit center in Seattle, like that's really a huge thing. That is going to be a fundamental driver for a long time. The stadiums and all the additional density that's coming to the stadium district, that's just going to add to the investment case for Pioneer Square. And then obviously the waterfront and being able to see that through. And that's only just beginning. We haven't really seen the economic benefit yet in Pioneer Square because it's still under construction. There's still a lot that has to happen. But if you look at this from a 10, 20, 30-year time horizon, we believe that this is as good of a location to invest in as anywhere in Seattle. And so the question specifically about, do we know something that others don't about cool? Not really. It's just realizing that if you make like long-term fundamental smart decisions about real estate and you prioritize getting the right mix of businesses and the right mix of tenants, ultimately that's what people are going to get attracted to. And if you stay true to that, the costs are going to be what the costs are. It's really about being patient. We could have leased up the entire ground floor of RailSpur before COVID probably. And we were talking to a lot of big national tenants that were willing to sign the lease rates that we had been asking. We could have programmed that right away.
Probably all had really good credit too.
Yeah. So
secure, solid deals.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we were a commodity real estate, institutional real estate company, we would have signed those deals and been done with it. But you all know this. I mean, most buildings are known by what's on the ground floor. If you have an incredible restaurant or incredible retail concept, like that's what people know about your building. And if you have, not to discredit national tenants, but if you have something that's more of like a commodity, if there's a Starbucks and a 7-Eleven and a whatever else, Trader Joe's in the ground floor, you're not very different than other other buildings. And so we've really tried to be patient and find the right tenant. And as we announce these restaurant and retail tenants, our expectation is they're still there thriving in their business 20 years from now. And what that does, not only to the ground floor viability, but to the hotel, to the office space, to the apartments, the value is extended up throughout the building if you get the ground floor right. And so we really try to be slow and meticulous when we're picking our ground floor tenants.
Do you believe in the result of doing a great project like what you're doing, being thoughtful about the tenants, the design, et cetera, that you sort of lift the bar in the neighborhood and other developers, investors, et cetera, will now see it maybe as a safer bet and sort of rise to the occasion of, well, look at that place is jamming and rocking, throughout the day, throughout the weekend, evening. The market wants that. Let's do that. I mean, do you see that in some of your other projects where
yes,
people are responding to a high bar when it comes to the cool factor?
Absolutely. Not only does it drive more business, RailSpur, I believe when we're open and thriving, RailSpur will single-handedly drive more foot traffic into Pioneer Square. It'll be a more interesting place to spend time. It'll be a more interesting place to go have dinner with your spouse. It'll be a place that people will linger after a sports game. And that will drive more and more investment. That will drive other tenants, other restaurants, other retail businesses to do better. And ultimately, that will drive to additional investment in real estate and we've seen this time and time again in different markets. I've already talked a couple times about Lodo in Denver. We first started acquiring buildings in Lodo in the late 1990s. At that time, it was not the top district in Denver. It was a lot like Pioneer Square has been for the last 20 years in Seattle. And but we saw some of the same types of long-term drivers that are happening in Pioneer Square with the mass transit and the public investment and the density of the stadiums and all that stuff was also taking place in lower downtown in Lodo. And so we were able to invest and continue to bring great projects to that market. And what we saw was more and more investors and developers followed suit. And there was this significant rising tide. And now Lodo is one of the top markets in Colorado. And I believe the same thing is happening in Pioneer Square. COVID was definitely something that slowed down that transition. It was really sad to see that Unico has been dissolving a lot of their investments. We saw that as a really good, counterpunch to what we were doing. We believe, again, taking the long-term view, just because Unico's selling a lot of their assets doesn't mean that other investors won't be doing the same. And like I said before, we're planning on doing more investing as well, so that the whole district will start to come up.
As we continue to kind of work our way out of COVID in downtowns and urban districts around the country, are you of the mind that sort of downtowns and the definition of cool and what people want needs to be sort of fundamentally reinvented? Or do you think, no, the model and recipe for a great urban place is still very much the same post-COVID versus pre-COVID, and what we ought to be doing is just recommitting to that? Where do you sort of land on, how much needs to be different as we think about rebuilding downtowns versus recommitted to?
I think the one thing I would say, which hasn't been true for thousands of years, but we kind of lost our way over the last 50 years, is that true mix of uses, residential and office, and the mixing within a neighborhood. Downtown Seattle's got a lot of great residential, but there are pockets. There are pockets with heavy office density and pockets with heavy residential density. And I think the more that we can commingle and mix that stuff up, creates more resiliency for both product types. And so to me, that would be the biggest change that we've seen since COVID, is the neighborhoods that do have that mix have done better. They've bounced back better. They've recovered to a higher level. When you try to separate uses and create certain districts full of one concentration of use, it's not very resilient. And I think we've seen that time and time again. And so that to me would be the biggest shift.
Does that mean sort of every block should aspire to more of a village, more of a mix, and that we shouldn't have a CBD that's only dedicated to office and whatever ground floor retail and food and beverage serves the office?
Exactly. Yeah, because otherwise you end up having these environments in which it's really, really busy, and then it gets totally dead. And that
or it just
sort of
doesn't
swelling
get
and
busy anymore.
Right.
I mean, the financial district in San Francisco that doesn't get too busy anymore. It's just quiet.
I was at a conference a couple of weeks ago in New York, and there were all these movers and shakers from the commercial real estate world, and a lot of them were saying that those kind of districts may be completely zero value. A lot of buildings that were built in the 60s and 70s in these big office complexes, these big office parks, didn't have a lot of investment. So there's a lot of deferred maintenance. Nobody wants to rent the spaces. And so you have these assets that are not very appealing, have major investment that are needed to bring them up to kind of modern standards, and no sense of momentum from a neighborhood. So, if people vacate and don't come back to the office, there's not a lot of stewards there to say, let's revitalize this community. And so, from a lot of the institutional minded investors, the thought is these assets are virtually worthless. That's a pretty scary situation until you start to think about, is there a way to change the use? Can you start to infuse some residential in those districts to start, again, to create that sense of a village, that sense of continuity and human beings that are willing to fight for their neighborhood. Right now, when it's just an office product, there's no real identity. The other thing I would say that I think has changed, and it's something that's near and dear to our hearts, is the idea that buildings have a big impact on the environment, on the health of the planet. And there's been a bit of an awakening since COVID. I saw Deloitte just came out with a report that almost 50% of U.S. consumers would be willing to pay a premium for a green product. That's, if you kind of let that settle in for a second, that relates to all products, but certainly to buildings. If I can build a building that's better for the planet, theoretically, half of the businesses out there would be willing to pay a premium for that. And you see that when you see lease rates, what buildings are performing better. Yeah, it's these great mixed use environments. That is probably the biggest driver. But also, is the building sustainable? Is it a good building for the planet? And I think that that's becoming a bigger priority. So your question about what has changed since COVID and how is that going to affect our industry, I think that the awareness of the impact of buildings on the planet has gone way up, and a lot more people are focused on it.
Do you think that's true, that there's a premium as well on design and then the experience, whether it's hospitality, retail, office, residential, that if I'm going to spend the extra time or money to be in an urban environment, then and get me off the couch or behind the computer, or, out of my own neighborhood that I grew to know in a different way through COVID, does the design and experience that I'm arriving to have to be of a higher quality than pre-COVID?
Absolutely. I would say the environmental aspect has a very fine margin, a very fine premium. It's not a huge draw. The creation of place, the sense of being in an environment that's thriving, that's vibrant, that you want to be a part of, has a huge driver in value. For any of us that studied real estate in school, the very first thing that we heard was the top 3 rules of commercial real estate is location, location, location. But what you didn't learn is that location is fungible. It's kind of always changing. There are a lot of areas that were premium locations in the 80s, and now you can't get anybody to go there. And so this idea of creation of place, I've heard placemaking has been this big term in real estate. But what that really means is you're creating a better location. If you can drive demand to your building because of the fact that it's got the best restaurant in town or the best environment, there's all sorts of things going on, you've created a better location. And that adage of, the most important thing in real estate is location, location, location. Well, that's more true now than it's ever been. And recognizing that that you don't buy the corner of Main and Main and sit on it for 50 years and it's still the corner of Main and Main. Cities change and evolve, and so being able to create dynamic places changes the premium on location, and that's the biggest financial driver in real estate.
And speaking of studying all this stuff in school, how did you find your way into this business and industry?
I was one of those kids that was obsessed with Legos, and I would build cities out of Legos in my bedroom, and that just sort of continued to grow into a career in real estate. I studied it in college and have had the opportunity to be aligned with some amazing partners that have a similar passion for building extraordinary places that are going to change the communities we work in and invest in for generations to come. And that's really been the biggest driver for me and all my partners that work together.
Why not architecture, contracting? Why development?
I think of development as kind of the net that catches all the aspects of commercial real estate. As a developer, you have to deal with leasing and brokerage and property management and architecture and construction and all those aspects. And so, for me, I love the fact that I get to play in all those trades, but not be an expert at any of them. I think that there are a lot of creative industries out there, but the one thing I really value and appreciate about real estate is it's one of those industries where you can imagine something. You can close your eyes, look at a piece of dirt or look at an old building and imagine what it could be, and then work your tail off and ultimately create it and then experience it. So there's no greater satisfaction than having poured years of your life into creating something and then going and having dinner in the building that you built.
And see others experience it, right?
Exactly, yeah. To be able to actually physically interact with the creation that you've put together is a pretty extraordinary thing and something that most industries don't get to experience.
I had a great experience on Saturday at Urban Farmer.
Yeah.
In your project there in Denver.
Yeah,
great brunch and great building and great block. We have a couple of standard questions on the podcast,
Sure.
Jon, which is, speaking of how you got into this line of work, your first job that you drew a paycheck for.
My first job, I didn't draw a paycheck, but I was a newspaper delivery boy when I was 11.
That counts.
And so I collected my paycheck in quarters, but I did try to take it very seriously. My grandmother would help me put together a spreadsheet, and I would track which areas, which corners, which buildings I sold the most papers, and I would sort of like streamline my route in order to figure out where to go first and how to maximize my revenue. And so that was my first job.
So were you like point of sale, not delivering to the lawn of a house?
I literally would walk through office buildings and talk to individuals and see if they would buy. Yeah. But it was a great job, and I loved it. And my grandfather was a home builder. And so I also, as a young kid, got to work on job sites and sit in on meetings with architects and homeowners and stuff, and so I got that little taste of what real estate's all about in this real creation of a home or a place at an early age.
That was the inspiration along with the Legos?
Yes.
Yeah. Our other standard question is usually for Seattleites, Seattle city makers. We're mostly talking to Seattleites, but every now and then we have some good folks from out of town. So we modify it a bit. But since you spent some time here, maybe you want to answer it, but you can answer it in any way you like. The standard question is your perfect Saturday in the city of Seattle. Like if you could build an itinerary morning to evening, but if you want to make it Denver or you pick your favorite city, you tell us your favorite city and what you're doing there around the world.
Well,
you have three options.
I'll give it a shot for Seattle. My ideal day, and I love doing this whenever I'm in town, is I get up before sunrise and I walk down the waterfront up through Olympic Park. And it is, I think for your listeners and for all of you that are in Seattle, you have an absolutely unworldly amenity in your city. Being right on the water and having the park and that system, I think is just absolutely unbelievable. And the fact that you can be next to nature right in the heart of this dense city is pretty extraordinary.
It's only going to get better.
Yeah, exactly. So I love that. I also love after walking up the waterfront to be able to go up through Pike's Place and see this, sort of hot mess of tourism, but also a lot of local, real commerce happening. I think that's just an extraordinary experience, being able to see
Talk about a village.
Pike's Place. Yeah, and there's history, and there's there's these fun discoveries as you go through Post Alley, and you start to see these little things that, I've found some amazing restaurants in there. Radiator Whiskey, it's one of my favorite places in Seattle, and it's like, you're kind of wandering up there thinking like, am I even allowed to be here? Am I going to get kicked out? I just think that that's such a cool part of the city. I would say I love the stadiums. I think the sports scene here is absolutely incredible. So being able to go to a Seattle Seahawks game, hopefully not playing the Broncos and Russell Wilson, but being able to go to a Seattle Seahawks game. And then I'm going to go a little bit of foreshadowing, starting next year, stay at the Westland Hotel and have an incredible cocktail on the rooftop. And
Love it.
then come down and have a bite to eat at the new restaurant that'll be opening at 419 Occidental.
That's a good day.
Yeah.
That's a good day. I'll do that day as well when that hotel's open. I think that rooftop restaurant bar is going to be the place to be.
Yeah.
And that cocktail bar you mentioned too will be pretty great, I think.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for making time for this and joining us, John, on your visit here to Seattle. What are you doing this week? I know you're on a Biz Now panel, and
I am. Yeah, tomorrow I'll be in the Biz Now panel, and I'm actually meeting the restaurant group that we're going to be moving into 419. I'm having dinner with them tonight with the principals of that. So hopefully finalizing a lease. And
we'll keep our eyes and ears open for an announcement there.
Yeah. And then tomorrow I've got I'm touring the job site for the hotel with the JTM as our general contractor. So touring with them, and whenever you're doing construction on an old 130-year-old building, there's always something to look at and always some problem to solve. And so that will be my day tomorrow.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, John, and for the investment you all are making, and importantly, the thoughtful investment you're making in the city and downtown and Pioneer Square. And look forward to taking it all in and getting down to RailSpur.
Great. Thank you.
Well, hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jon Buerge, a terrific developer, and they're just doing such a great job and being so thoughtful in how they're approaching the historic properties they've acquired in Pioneer Square. It's going to be an incredible project. It's great to see a number of tenants already with their doors open, and John spilled the beans a little bit on who else is on the way, and it's going to be great. It's going to be fabulous. So stay tuned for some of those additional announcements from the folks at Urban Villages about who else will be calling RailSpur home. As I do each and every episode, I want to close out with a recommendation of something you need to check out in downtown Seattle. And I would just say, go check out RailSpur. If you haven't been there, again, there's tenants in place already. Go wander the alley that they've remade. There's some incredible artwork that is on those alley walls that they debuted during All-Star Week, these incredible baseball murals. It's a beautiful property and project. Go check it out, support those retailers, and spend some money in the Pioneer Square neighborhood. Stay tuned for some more announcements and the opening of their hotel next summer and the rooftop bar and restaurant. I'm looking forward to that. Well, thanks for joining us on this episode of Seattle City Makers, presented by the Downtown Seattle Association, with support from James Cito and production by Spark Creative.